so much for being here.
Thank you. So I have never been to this corner of Ohio before, and I am completely charmed. This is unbelievably beautiful campus and lovely community. And it's been fabulous to connect with people that I didn't even know existed 48 hours ago. And yes, I feel like some of them are like, the tattoo. But we're all working on Facebook and it has been so nurturing to me to form the connections with you all here. And that's actually a theme of the talk I gave yesterday. It's a theme of the talk today, is making connections that that have been severed. And so let me just dive right in. And I'm going to start. What's going on here? It worked a minute ago. Seems to be frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm going to start with what might seem like a strange set of images. These are various artists' vision of what early humans' lives might have been like. Who knows whether or not they're accurate? But if you can think back to what humans' lives were like, and even just maybe, let's say, 100 or 150 years ago here in this country, everyday lives were really quite different. And people were very intimately connected to the sources of their food, their water, their fuel. So if they heated their house, it was because they had shoveled coal or hauled water, hauled wood, split the wood. They knew how much energy it took to produce that heat. They knew how much energy it took to haul the water or pump the water. And they could see the quality of the water really quite directly. So our earlier ancestors had continuous information, continuous feedback about the state of the environment and the cost of the resources they used. They knew where those resources came from. They put in the sweat equity to get those resources. And that made them very deeply embedded in a system with all kinds of feedback loops. And we don't have that anymore. How many people in this room know the source of the electricity that is keeping these lights on? Ooh. Maybe a couple of people? Okay. All right. So you've got no idea, most of you, right? Do you know where your water comes from? Most of it, okay, some people know where the water comes from, but most of you don't, right? And so actually the people that deliver your utilities to you pride themselves on you never thinking about where those things come from. And so you walk into a room and you flip the light on and you don't know, you don't see the coal plant down in Meigs County that generated that electricity. You don't know where the water came from. You don't know what the quality was of the environment that water was being pulled from. You have been completely disconnected from those sources of information that humans used to have regular and immediate access to. So in order to create a sustainable world, in order for us to build systems that we can meet our basic needs in a sustainable way, we need to reconnect. We need to reintroduce feedback loops. Feedback loops are an essential part of any functioning system. That we have to have them, and right now we don't. And so what we've been doing in Oberlin is exploring ways to use technology to help reforge some of those feedback loops. So feedback is everywhere. Nature's got its feedback loops going on, predator-prey cycles, etc. And it's doing its thing, right? Humans have used feedback in their social groups ever since humans were humans. We use things like gossip, and we use social approval or disapproval to give people feedback about what we think of their behavior and whether or not they're being good group members. And of course, we have adopted feedback strategies into our technology. The most common example is a thermostat, which helps regulate the temperature of our buildings. So what we want to do is combine these different types of feedback. So we have ecological feedback, we have social feedback, and we have technological feedback. And we are developing systems that provide all three of those kinds of feedback in one package. At least that's the goal. Okay, so the question that we ask in our research is how do we leverage the power of feedback to create more sustainable systems, more sustainable mechanisms for humans to be making decisions so that we can be better stewards of the environment that we're living in. And I've got to look at I can't do this from memory. We have a number of goals with this technology. So the big picture is that we want to promote systems thinking, people recognizing that we are not islands just floating alone, that we are interconnected to each other and also to our ecosystems, and also to help people recognize the power of their choices and the consequences of their choices so that they can make better choices. So we want to foster a sense of connection and belonging. We want people to understand how their decisions fit into the larger pattern of decisions that humans are making and what impact that has on the ecosystem. We want to lift up all the great pro-environmental thought and behaviors that are happening out there, but tend to remain invisible. And of course, we want to change what people are doing so that we can create a more resilient culture. So we have developed what we call socio-technical feedback. And what do you need feedback to have? What characteristics does it have to have for it to be effective at changing behavior? Well, one thing is it needs to be very easy to use. So it needs to be accessible. It needs to provide information that you can actually act on, right? It's not just some random number and there's nothing you can do. There's something you could do. And there also needs to be a really tight feedback cycle. So for those of you, so many of you maybe have never paid an electric bill, but some people in this room have paid an electric bill, and you know that you get the bill at the end of the month. And let's say 1 month it's jumped up really high. It's really hard actually to piece together why, because you're getting the bill like probably 2 weeks after the billing cycle. So maybe the behavior you were engaging in was 5 or 6 weeks ago, and you don't know which behavior it was. That is not a tight cycle. On the other hand, if any of you have driven a Prius or some other electric vehicle, you can see right in the dashboard what you're doing with brakes and with the gas pedal. You can immediately see the impact that has on your fuel efficiency. That's a tight, actionable feedback cycle, right? So you get that feedback, you know what to do. It's right there in front of you on the dashboard. You know what to do, and you can see the results immediately. Number two, we want to leverage the power of social norms. So I'm a social psychologist, and I don't have any people take psychology. Few of you have taken it. Okay. So so one of the things that you learn in social psychology is that humans really like to fit in, and they like to go along with other people. We have a really strong desire to belong and be a member of a group. And even though you'll say that this is not true of you, it is true of you, that the best way to get you to do something is to tell you that all the people like you are already doing it. So this is a super powerful way to shape human behavior. And we want to be taking advantage of that in our socio-technical feedback. Okay. There's another thing that we're trying to do with this technology, and that is we want to engage people's emotional and moral systems. We want people to have feelings about their energy use, their water use, and the impact it has on the environment. We know from lots of psychological research that if we care about something, we will take action to protect it. So we don't want people all up in their heads about these issues. We want people to be feeling things in their hearts, because that is what really motivates behavior and behavior change. So these are all the things that we're trying to do. Let me show you how we're doing it. So we've developed something called Environmental Dashboard, and the website is up there. You can type it in and go check it out. And there's more information about all of the pieces of this on that website. It has 4 components, and I'm going to talk about each of them. Citywide dashboard, building dashboard, community voices, and then there's a calendar, which I'm not really going to talk about very much, but it's there, part of the package. Okay, so we have these 4 components that each of them is doing something slightly different. And we deliver these 4 components through at least 3 ways. These are the 3 main ways that they get delivered. So in Oberlin and also in parts of downtown Cleveland and in the Toledo Public Schools and a couple of other places, there are digital signs. And I saw a couple digital signs in this building as I was walking around. So those digital signs are everywhere. And this content rotates through those digital signs. So one thing that's really great about that is that those signs are, as we like to say, in your space, in your face. You can't really avoid them. And you don't have to go seek them out. You're just going about your everyday life, and there they are. And so it allows us to reach an audience that would never bother to go to the website, right? We do have the website. It's got a lot of information. You can do a deep dive, and there's, some people who are really into that and will go and do that, but that's not actually, we don't really expect that to be the main driver. Another mechanism that we've used is embedding pieces of the dashboard in the curriculum in the public schools and also at Oberlin, at the college. And also as part of the scientific displays at the Great Lakes Science Center in Cleveland. So these are all different ways that we're leveraging this technology to reach out to people in a variety of ways, a variety of different ages. There are some installations of dashboard where there is a keypad, or you can actually use your phone, scan a QR code and use your phone and control what shows up on the screen. So that people can get a little more interactive and not just sort of passively watch what's happening. Okay, so we have built multiple levels of feedback into this technology. So let's start by thinking about status quo. Right now, we have people living in their homes, making decisions about how to use resources. And those decisions have consequences for the environment. That, of course, has consequences for our community. But right now, nothing is connecting the dots here, right? There's no feedback loop. It's just the arrows are going in one direction. There's no mechanism for people to find out what impact they're having and then decide what to do about it. So metering is one important piece of what we're doing here. Oberlin is a very extensively metered campus. So you can go online and find out how much water and electricity is being used in most buildings on campus, not every single one, but most of them. Every dorm, you can do that. And so that metering is displayed on the website and on signs around campus. And that makes the connection back to the people, right? And so now people are getting information about what's happening, and it can inform their decision making. So we have created one feedback loop. We also want to give people information about the state of the environment. So one of the components that I'll describe to you gives information, for example, about water quality in the stream where we get our water and where our discharge is let out, so that people get a sense of that. So they're getting not information just about their resource use in their building, but what's happening in the natural environment. And so that creates another feedback loop. And then finally, we are in community voices, we are lifting up thoughts and feelings and actions of people in the community. And that is being displayed and funneled back to people. And that creates a third feedback loop. I bet that most people in this room don't go around talking all the time about how worried they are about climate change or all the stuff they do in the privacy of their own home or dorm room to try to protect the environment. We don't talk about it very much, right? So it turns out that there's all kinds of amazing stuff happening inside people's heads, happening in the privacy of their homes, and yet we don't know it. And so by making this visible, we are helping to leverage and create those social norms. I'm going to talk a lot more about that later on. Okay, So let's dig in. I'm going to walk you through the components of environmental dashboard. And so I want to acknowledge my collaborator, John Peterson, is really the driving force behind this. I was a psychologist that came along and said, no, John, you're weird. Nobody else wants to look at data that way. You need to change how you're doing this. And he graciously listened to me. So my role was to help figure out, from the psychological perspective, what is the best way to present this information? But John really is the brainchild and the driving force behind it all. So I want to make sure he gets credit. So what you're looking at here is a display of electricity use. And so I'm going to play a little clip. Hopefully this works. So there are lots of buildings in town that have this kind of display. And the display is dynamic. And so what you'll see is that we can look and see different levels of electricity use. And the squirrel reacts, right? So we worked with a very talented cartoonist, graphic designer, to create Flash the Energy Squirrel. And from a psychological perspective, what happens when you're watching Flash the Energy Squirrel is your social cognition system is being activated. And so all of the values and rules that you use when you think about how to treat other people, it's activated. And so we are getting people to have emotions about electricity use, right? The squirrel has big eyes. There's a reason for that. Big eyes capture our attention. Babies have big eyes relative to their face. And we trust people with big eyes more. People that have tiny little eyes, we don't trust them. And so, we've built in a number of things to try to get people to be drawn in and to care about Flash the Energy Squirrel. And it's hard not to have some kind of an emotional reaction to his expressions. So there's also a static mode. And so here the little ball isn't moving, but the energy squirrel engages in a variety of behaviors, and it's just kind of amusing and cute, right? But the energy squirrel also has a storytelling mode. And so, these are different things, like you're in the grocery store and you're standing online waiting to pay for your groceries, and there's a sign up there. And so the squirrel is going through these different things. So we are connecting electricity use to your emotions, to your sense of morality, and the squirrel is communicating to you. I get really upset when you guys are using a lot of electricity. Okay, so citywide dashboard is basically the goal here is to connect what people are doing in their homes, their schools, their workplaces, to what's happening in the community at large. And here, what we're really trying to do is make these systems that support our everyday life. You go and you flush the toilet, and you probably do not think about where that waste is going, but it's going somewhere, right? You don't think about where your water comes from, et cetera. So this piece of environmental dashboard is designed to make visible that system that supports us that otherwise is underground or behind the walls, so we don't think about it. So this is what it looks like. It's a schematic. And on the right-hand side, you see that there are not dials, but gauges that show how much what's on that gauge. Total city electricity, right? So how much electricity has been used, how much water, et cetera. I actually don't think people look at those numbers. I don't think that's what's powerful about this. What I think is powerful about this is the image. And I want to walk you through different pieces of what we're doing here with this image. So first of all, we're showing people the freshwater and the wastewater treatment plants. We're reminding people that they exist, that this is this thing that has to happen for you to be able to drink and be able to flush your toilet. We're reminding them that the energy that's keeping their lights on is coming from somewhere. And then we have pieces of their community represented. So the buildings that you're seeing there in that red box are iconic buildings in Oberlin. And here we have iconic buildings from the campus. Oberlin has a square in the middle of it. So that again is an iconic piece of our community. So someone from Oberlin would look at this and would recognize it as being their town. And then front and center, we have the individual home. As I said, over here, we have the gauges. Now you can click through and look specifically at electricity and water, etc. We also have Flash, who gives little messages up there at the top. So let me show you. Here's electricity. And so you see the person in their house, and you can see the electricity pulsing down the lines. And those pulses, those little balls that are moving, they move in proportion to how much electricity is being used, right? So if a lot of electricity is being used in the community, you see lots of those little yellow balls flying down the wires. Here's water. Again, you see the water and the wastewater moving, and it pulses at the rate depending on how much water is being used. This is wastewater. We have the individual in their home sitting on the toilet, reading the paper. And what we're seeing here is, I think, yeah, it's water quality information, right? And then finally, we have a weather feature. I don't know how much this is used, but it's there in case somebody wants to know what the weather conditions are. We're hoping in the very near future to add air quality to this. And I think that's going to really make a big impact because air quality is very responsive. And it's something that, you know, people can literally feel it in their nose. So I'm really excited about that. We're putting up monitors right now so that we'll be able to do that. Okay, so this was designed so that you could create citywide dashboards for other communities. So this is Oberlin, but here you see one mocked up for San Francisco. This technology was developed by the company Lucid, and they're based in San Francisco. We created a similar situation for Toledo and Toledo Public Schools. Okay. So the third main component that I want to talk about today is community voices. And this is actually the most psychological piece of the whole display. And I have to confess that John dreamed this up one semester when I was on sabbatical, and I had nothing to do with it. And I came back and he showed it to me, and I was like, oh my God, you've been listening to me all these years. It was a very satisfying moment. So community voices is a way to make visible the pro-environmental thought and action that's happening in every community. And so it's a combination of images that come from the community. So these are not, you know, stock photos. These are pictures that people in Oberlin took. And they also lift up the words and thoughts of people in Oberlin. And so when you're walking around Oberlin, you're likely to see somebody you know up on the screen, or a picture of a place where you've been up on the screen. So it really feels like, yeah, these are my people talking to me. So let's see. Let me just walk you through a few of the slides. So there are different themes, and the goal here is very broad. So one of the things that we want to do is expand what people think of when we say sustainability. For those of us in the know, you know, there's the 3 pillars of sustainability. You've got the social, the economic, and the environmental. Most people just think about the environmental piece. So we really are trying to capture a much broader sense of what does it mean to have a sustainable community? And part of what it means is liking your neighbors and doing nice things for your neighbors, right? Crystal Long, who is the quote here is from Crystal Long. Everybody knows her. Everybody knows Ben Franklin. So when this quote comes up and they see, oh, she said that, that is really sending a powerful message. Like, yeah, in this community, we take care of each other. Some of the content refers to our heritage. So some of the content has been taken from historical documents so that we can see what were people in Oberlin saying 100 years ago. Oberlin has I've loved bicycles for a really long time. And so by putting that up there, we're sending a message, not just like, yeah, we're bicycle friendly now, but this is a deep part of our history and our heritage. We like to have images of everybody in the community. And so one of the things that we put a lot of effort into in the beginning was making sure that we were not simply featuring the usual suspects on the screen. So we sought out people that wouldn't necessarily be seen as community leaders to include and have them be part of the content. This is one of my absolute favorite slides. I walk to live. I mean, I just love that. We also have a lot of content that features kids. We had this theory that kids were going to be really effective spokespeople. And we ran 3 studies and all 3 of them said, no, they are not effective spokespeople. However, they're cute. And we do know that they capture attention. You're more likely to look at a picture if there are kids in it. And the parents are all excited. The kids are all excited. So we still think there's value, even though kids as spokespeople, apparently that's just not effective. Anyway. And we also wanted to make sure that we included the economic piece of sustainability. So part of what we do here is we promote downtown businesses. We had all of the downtown business owners interviewed and their content is up here. And one thing that was super interesting about that, the students would come and say, hey, we want to do an interview for you about sustainability. And many of them would say, oh, I don't, that's not really me. I don't really do anything about sustainability. And then they would start talking and they were totally doing stuff that was related to sustainability. It just wasn't part of their identity. And so that's another exciting thing that we can do here is we're giving people the opportunity to see themselves as community leaders and to see themselves as being part of a movement to create a more sustainable community. We have recently added content that is specific to climate. There is a really important paper that came out in 2022 and it's been since replicated showing that, well, let me pause and ask. A couple of you already know the answer to this question, so keep your mouth shut. What percentage of people in Ohio do you believe are worried about climate change? I'll let some guess. What do you think? 70? 70. Any other guesses? 40. You said 40? Yeah, I'm worried. So 70 is the right answer. Did you? I did not. Okay, so you got it right, which is very unusual actually, because most people guess around 30 to 40%. And so we actually, one of the biggest problems that we have right now with climate change is that we overestimate the number of skeptics. The majority of Republicans are worried about climate change, and we don't know that. So one of the goals that we have in our most recent efforts is to talk about climate change, because people are often afraid to talk about it because they're afraid they're going to piss people off or get in a fight with somebody or whatever. But the truth is 70% of the people you talk to are going to be concerned about climate change. So we've introduced this new content and we have some content that we're testing right now where we have conservatives talking about climate change, and we're going to be evaluating, is that an effective way to communicate with conservatives about this? Okay, so we're trying to do a number of things here with Community Voices content. And let me say a bit about how we generate it. So we have, most of this is done by students. So students are getting really important experience in taking oral histories and in interviewing, which are valuable research skills. And they go out and they interview with the community. It's also another way to build connections because they're talking to people that they wouldn't normally talk with. They do those interviews and then they pull out short quotes. Those quotes are tagged for various themes. The pictures we have a giant database of pictures. Those are tagged for various themes. And then the photos and the quotes are matched up and it's kind of this constantly revolving content. And so you're not just seeing the same old static pictures over and over and over again, because the database is large and things are being matched up in different ways based on the tags, so that you've always got fresh content. So for the people we interview, we want to change their identity. We've sought them out. We've told them we think their ideas are important. And then their pictures go up on the screen. And so that's a way of helping them see themselves as leaders in the sustainability movement. It celebrates them. And it's also, there's one of these sneaky social psychology things. When we make a public commitment, we're much more likely to stick to it. So when people, publicly say, yeah, this is what I'm doing, they're actually much more likely to keep doing it. What we hope viewers will take from it, one of the main things is we want to increase pro-environmental norms. I mentioned before that norms are a really powerful shaper of human behavior. So if you feel like it's very, very common, like practically everybody in Oberlin is composting, you're going to feel more pressure to do it. You're going to be more likely to do it. We also want to increase people's concern, their willingness to take action. We want to promote local businesses. We want to make people feel like what we're doing now is connected to their heritage, because that gives people a sense of meaning. And we also want to expand people's sense of what it means to be sustainable, that it's not just about hugging trees, right? It's about buying local, it's about being kind to your neighbors. All of those things are part of the picture. We do have a community calendar feature, and it's just a functional community calendar, and nothing particularly special about it. We, of course, I've chosen a sustainability related thing, but all kinds of stuff gets put on this calendar. I will say that what adding it has done is people are much more invested in maintaining the technology now, because it's much more useful to them. And it's super easy for people to get content on this calendar. And it drives people to Environmental Dashboard, and they see the other content also, because it's all mixed in together. Okay. So just briefly, let me say a little bit more about how we deliver this. So we have, I don't remember the number, but a lot of signs all over Oberlin. So this picture here is in the public library. This one is in the grocery store. So literally you cannot check out at the grocery store without looking at this damn sign. And then we have them in the public schools and a number of other businesses throughout Oberlin. So they have all the content that you've just seen, and it just rotates through. But the locations can also add content of their own. So for example, at our coffee shop, they can put up a menu, or they can advertise their trivia night that happens every Tuesday. So each location can add content that's appropriate for wherever it is they are, things that they want to make sure that people in their environment know about. Yeah, I just okay. I mentioned the Environmental Dashboard on the website. So this just allows people to take a deep dive. And then we have integrated it in a variety of ways into the curriculum. And I'm going to describe a study in a little bit that gives you a sense of how we did that. Okay. We see being part of the science curriculum in the elementary school as really important, because young people are more malleable than old people. It is easier to teach a young dog new tricks than an old dog, although old dogs can learn new tricks. And really what we're trying to do is give them a different worldview. We don't just want to teach them facts. We want to teach them a fundamentally different way of looking at the world. And doing that through the public schools, where you can reach all of the community. And there's evidence, anecdotal evidence, that what they're learning in the classroom gets taken back home to the parents as well. So one way that we've engaged the public schools as well as the community and the college is through resource reduction competitions. I don't know, and Olivia, I don't know if you know, but maybe 10 years ago now, there were a number of years where campuses all over the country did resource reduction competitions. Do you know whether Miami participated?
Yeah, Miami did one, and in every residence hall where we tried to reduce, students used more. So we tried to do it for electricity, waste, and water, and in every category we had a competition choose less, they used more.
Okay, well that's not how it's supposed to go. So those research competitions were started at Oberlin, and it was Oberlin students who started Lucid, and Lucid ran those competitions for a number of years. And in our research, they led to resource reduction. And so every year they do a resource reduction competition, and it's super effective among the elementary school students in particular. They get really into it and really excited. And they talk about it at home all the time. And so here is one of the data visualizations that's available for, it's not part of what I showed you. It's available for building operators, but they made it available to the school kids as part of the curriculum. And so this is a heat map. And so what you're looking at is a visual representation of electricity use across different days. So you can see the green on the far left and the right, those are the weekends, right? That's Sunday, Saturday and Sunday. Guess which 3 weeks was the competition? Can you see it? Yeah, you can, right? So that is the competition. And what's cool is that electricity use did go up a little bit after the competition, but not back to the original levels, right? Those last 3 bars are a little more orange and a little less red than the stuff at the top. Okay, so it looks really cool. I think it looks really cool. I love Flash the Squirrel. Does it actually work? And there's lots of examples out there where there was some program or some technology that looked really cool, but it didn't actually work. So built into this whole process of development, we have also been evaluating and testing. And I'm just going to share little snippets of that with you today, just to give you a sense that that I'm not just making all this stuff up, and that, you know, it might actually have some value. So does the building dashboard work? And unlike Miami University, the answer seems to be yes. So what we found across 3 years of resource reduction competitions at Oberlin, not every dorm had access to this technology at that time. And what we found was the dorms who did, the dorms who had access to their real-time electricity and water data, successfully reduced their resource use significantly more than the dorms that did not. Anecdotally, there's this really great story of during one of the competitions in the public schools, the elementary schools kids were really tracking this, and they actually discovered a really costly water leak that had gone undetected for we have no idea how long. But they, you know, they were looking and like, we're losing in water. Why are we losing in water? And they went digging, and they led to the discovery of this water leak. And that was an incredibly empowering experience for those kids. So what I'm showing you here is some data that is a little complicated, but let me walk you through it. So we had a test of our curriculum to teach science concepts. And in this situation, we actually had a control condition and an experimental condition. So some kids got a regular version of the curriculum, and some kids got a version of the curriculum that involved the environmental dashboard and this feedback technology. And we were interested in a number of different things. What I've highlighted here are 3 things. First of all, we wanted them to learn the material. So the question was, did using this technology help them learn the material better? We wanted to teach them systems thinking. We wanted them to be able to better think about more complex causality. And we also wanted them to come away with a sense of collective efficacy, of a sense of like, hey, we can do things. We as a community can create change. And so what you're seeing here is first we have time 1, and then we have time 2. So we got 3 measures. They experienced the curriculum, and then we measured everything again. And we have our control conditions are in the blue, and the experimental conditions are in the gray and black. And so basically the data really couldn't have been more beautiful. This is one of those like fantasy studies where we saw better retention, better content retention, right? The control condition went down a tiny bit, probably not significant, but our experimental condition went up significantly. They started out a little higher in systems thinking, but then it really increased significantly, whereas the other condition did not change. And then finally,
we had a drop in group efficacy for the control condition, but we had an increase in group efficacy for the experimental condition. Okay.
So what about citywide dashboard? Well, we have not figured out a way to evaluate whether it changes people's resource use. And frankly, I bet it doesn't. I think looking at those very big numbers and your household is just one tiny little household, I don't really think that's what that citywide dashboard is doing. But we do have evidence that it changes the way people think. So we ran 2 studies. One was a longitudinal study, one was just a short online study. And in both cases, we found evidence that simply looking at that map that I showed you increased systems thinking. It made people see longer chains of causality. And I'll describe the measures we use briefly so you get a sense of what I mean. So here, this is our short online study. They just looked at that, the citywide dashboard, and they played around with it for a little while. They saw all the different features. It was like 5 minutes. And then we gave them a measure that's used to measure attributional complexity. So let me explain what that means. So when we are going about our daily lives, we see people engage in behaviors and we make explanations about them. And a lot of the time we make very simple explanations. If someone is rude, we conclude they are a jerk. It's very simple, right? That's actually rarely a good explanation. Usually it's like, well, the person's going through a divorce and they had a really hard day and whatever, you know, they spilled their coffee and they haven't had their caffeine, or, you know, there are all kinds of reasons why we engage in the behaviors that we'll go to. Simplistic causal explanations are not systems thinking. Systems thinking means that you are open to a more complex understanding of what causes what and what leads to what. So in this study, people read this little description of apologies to the faculty here, a graduate student who kills their advisor. I don't know why. And then they were presented with a list of 100 facts and were asked to click the ones that they thought were relevant to solving the case. And I know this seems like a very strange measure, but what we know from other research is that people who think about the world in a more causal and complex way click more things. They're like, oh, well, that actually could be related, right? And so people who had watched the citywide dashboard, who had played with citywide dashboard, as you can see here, were thinking in a much broader way about what might be relevant to this case than our control condition. This is our longitudinal study, and we had people log into citywide dashboard every day for 5 days, and we measured systems thinking with causal complexity of thinking, and we also measured their sense of connections to nature. And here the data is broken out by people who started out low in connectedness to nature and high in connectedness to nature. And what we found was we actually didn't really impact the people who already were high in connectedness to nature. They were kind of maxed out on connectedness, and they didn't go any higher. But the people who were low in connectedness to nature at the beginning did increase. So we were able to increase connections to nature through technology. And they also dramatically increased the complexity with which they were thinking about causality. So we were impacting just the people that we wanted to impact. What about the empathetic gauges? Well, we know that at least among children, these empathetic gauges do change how they think about resource use. And so we did a study where we compared students in Bexley, Ohio, who have no dashboard, to students in Oberlin, Ohio. And what we found, I don't have any graph to show you, but what we found was that the students in Bexley, Ohio had no emotional reaction whatsoever to learning that, oh, your building's using a lot of electricity. Their response is basically, I don't care, right? But students in Oberlin who had had these dashboards in their hallways up on the screen, and many of them had lessons using environmental dashboard, they had an emotional reaction to learning that their building was using a lot of resources. We asked them what they would do. They had ideas about what to do. And one of the coolest findings was they were more likely to use the pronoun we. So the kids in Bexley, we asked them, what would you do? And they all wrote, I would someday. Oberlin students, there were not all of them, but many of them started the sentence with we would. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this seem like, okay, this is about us. This is not about an individual. This is about us. So last study that I want to describe really briefly, we did a longitudinal study, a field study in the community, where we collected survey data from people in the places where the screens were going to go, but before they went in. 2 years later, we went back and collected data from those same places. And this is, field studies are very messy. But what we found was that just the things that we wanted to be, increasing, had in fact increased. So people were, oh wait, that's a different study. That's great. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to tell you that community voices works. Okay. All right, so here's the study that I wanted to tell you about. So basically, 2 years later, members of our community reported thinking more about their electricity and their water use. So these ideas were kind of people's heads. They reported being more committed to environmental issues. They reported believing that members of their community were more committed to environmental issues. And one of the coolest findings we found, so we heavily featured people of color in our content, because we really wanted to make sure that we were representing voices that often got left behind. And so what we found was that in 2014, people of color had lower estimates of how normative it was to be concerned about the environment. But it was them in particular who increased their sense of, oh yeah, people are concerned about the environment. And so we took that as evidence that if people see people like me up on the screen, that is going to have an impact. And there's other psychological research to support that idea, but here we saw it working in our community. So I think that the take-home message that I want to leave you all with is that feedback is really powerful. It is a fundamental part of functioning systems. We have built a world where our feedback loops are broken, but there are all kinds of ways to reestablish feedback. And we've tried to incorporate several different ways into this technology. But it's important to remember, and I say this to the engineers in the room, that engineers are not normal people. And I'm an academic, I'm not a normal person either. So I'm right there with you. But whatever we do, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a psychologically impactful way and that we're speaking to the people that we want to reach in a way that's meaningful to them. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was wonderful. We do have time for a couple questions. I think the next class starts at 1:15 for students in the room. So we'll have about 7 minutes and then we can give everyone some time to get to class.
That was excellent, and really an exciting project, and I didn't realize how far we distributed the screening for throughout the community. So what was the funding mechanism to have all of this work?
Right, that's a really great question. So we received funding from the very first slide had all of our funding sources up there. We had a lot of different places. So some grants, we got a really big grant from the Great Lakes DLPF Protection Fund. And that allowed us to develop the initial technology. Now the funding comes now it's actually pretty simple. So if someone wanted to build this into their system, the hard part is the metering, but a lot of buildings are already metered. So if a building is already metered, then really what you're paying for is a little bit for the software and the screens, which are not particularly expensive. But yeah, so the reason it's cobbled together right now. Also in Oberlin, it's partly funded by the city because environmental dashboard is considered part of the city's climate action plan, part of our education approach. part of how we reach the community, to try to create the changes we need to create to reach our carbon neutrality goal.
I think you were a very gun-shy director of sustainability. Who wanted to do this, perhaps had evidence that Miami students like to be contrarian. And intentionally use more water and intentionally leave the lights on if they know they're in a competition. Any advice? for running such a program?
Well, I guess my first piece of advice would be, don't assume that just because that year's students were that way, that, you know, students now, 10 years later would be the same. So yeah, don't overgeneralize from that one data point would be my first thing. But my second thing is that, you know, the other pieces of the technology, you're not directly asking somebody to change their behavior. So a competition is directly asking people to change their behavior, but we have evidence that simply being exposed to this stuff changes behavior, even though you're not asking. And that often is a better route. And let me just flag something else, because one of the big critiques that people will often bring about this technology is, sure, it's up on the signs, but nobody's looking at them. Nobody's standing there and staring at the content, like it's not having any impact. Totally reasonable concern. However, we know that we are unconsciously influenced by what's in our environment all the time. So all those ads, when you're scrolling the internet that you think you're ignoring, you are not. They are, you know, filtering into your unconscious, and they are influencing your behavior. So people don't need to look at the signs to be influenced by them. A lot of what we're doing, I think, is just unconsciously reminding people of, oh yeah, there's a wastewater treatment plant out there somewhere. And a lot of our decision making comes from unconscious processes. So that's actually not a problem. It's not a bug. It's not a defect. It's a feature. That's the phrase. Yeah.
So this is a fantastic educational tool in and of itself, but do you have to do some education out front to prime people? Like, what is this thing and how do we use it? And, you know, how do we make it effective? Did you have to do some of that work out front before you introduce this, or did you just dump it out?
We had to do that work with educators to convince them to let us integrate with their curriculum, and with communications office and, you know, the businesses where we put the signs in, we had to convince them. But for the general public, no, we just put it up. And one of the slides that rotates through is a very brief explanation of what it is. But you know, people are kind of used to seeing weird stuff up on screens. So
Is any part of this funded with tax dollars from the local community?
yes, no, not tax dollars. It's funded with city money, but the money comes from, oh, it's very complicated. We have green recs, and they're expensive green recs, and we sell them, and then we buy cheap green recs, and then we have a profit, and that's what funds us. So yeah, but not tax dollars. Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes one of the, not criticism, but one of the concerns that I hear some people talk about is when you become net zero, then what's in the positive? Because obviously there's energy that goes into creating the boards and the energy that they're utilizing and like all of those pieces. Have you had enough time with this yet to know when you're like equal and then going net positive in terms of energy
Right.
consumption?
So that's a great
relative to
question.
savings?
Yeah, and it does come up because people will say, well, you're using electricity with these signs. The truth is, we have not done the calculation. It's actually really hard to quantify the unconscious behavioral effects that we might be having, the cultural changes and what the ripple effects of all that. But the energy that those signs use is teeny tiny. So, we're not worried about that. Like, it's a teeny tiny bit of energy. So I'm pretty confident that the benefits outweigh the costs, but it's a very good question.
I just want to thank you all for your attention to Dr. Franz this afternoon. And she would not be here if it weren't for our friends from Oxford Lane Library who won. Congrats again on winning that National Endowments for the Art Big Read grant. And I also want to thank Carla Blackmar, right, who is at the Hefner Museum and our tech extraordinaire. And thank you again to Cindy for sharing really inspiring example of what we could possibly do here. So I'm delighted to have the chance to talk with you more about that over lunch. So thank you all for your attendance. Have a great day. Thank you, Carla.
That was